Would you like to get more sleep and stop having to feed your baby so often during the night? To find out how to get more sleep for the whole family, stay tuned.
Welcome to Parenthood Prep, the only show that helps sleep-deprived parents and overwhelmed parents-to-be to successfully navigate those all-important early years with their baby, toddler, and child. If you're ready to provide the best care for your newborn, manage those toddler tantrums, and grow with your child, you're in the right place. Now, here's your host, baby and parenting expert, Devin Clement.
Hello, and welcome back to the Parenthood Prep podcast. It is starting to be the holiday season, which I just love. I'm a huge extrovert, in case that was unclear. So all the parties and events and theme bars and just different stuff going on, different stuff to do. I love the lights. I love the decorations. I love the food, the cookies, just everything. You know, gift giving is fantastic. I know it can be really stressful when you have kids. Actually, for our next episode, I'm going to talk about some really good gift ideas for kids that I hope you're going to like. A little different from what we've been seeing with all the Black Friday, sales that seem to start at Halloween now, promoting stuff to buy. And my list is a little different from that. So stay tuned for that next week. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you aren't already subscribed so that you can get all of those cool updates. So the long-awaited night weaning part 2, where we talked about in the last episode how to know if your baby is ready for night weaning. And now we're going to talk about how to actually do it. What is night weaning? Night weaning basically means that you are cutting back on or eliminating overnight feeds for your baby. So for whatever hours they are in bed, for kids up to really 2 years old, that's about 12 hours, say 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., something like that, you would reduce the number of feeds that they're having or eliminate them completely. And again, check with your pediatrician to make sure your baby is ready to eliminate feeds. But assuming that things have been going well and your baby is over 12 pounds, over say 4 months old, you should be good to go. And you can take the process as slowly or as quickly as you'd like. And I'm going to talk about some different ways to do that. Another note I wanted to add, sort of a follow-up to last week, is that I hate this myth that if you are breastfeeding, body feeding your baby, that you can't get them to sleep through the night, that you can't sleep train, you can't night wean because breast milk is, processed faster in the stomach and your baby's going to be hungry. That's just not true. A baby that is 100% fed on human milk, whether that's from the tap or from a bottle, is just as capable of sleeping through the night as a baby who is fed formula or a combination of things. The number of parents that have, said to me, sometimes really upset about it, that they feel like they have to stop nursing because they want their baby to sleep and they've heard that's the only way to do it. It makes me sad. And listen, I'm not saying you have to keep nursing if you don't want to. If you want to stop, stop. That's totally fine. But a lot of times people don't want to stop and they think that in order to get sleep, they have to. So don't think that. Sleep training has saved many, many nursing relationships. And I wish that some of the really dogmatic, lactation consultants and La Leche League leaders out there understood there's more to sleep and feeding your baby than just saying, they're not going to go to college needing to nurse at night. No, but that's a long way away. I want them to not need to nurse at night now so that everybody can get sleep. The one thing I will say is that your body and your boobs and your milk supply are a personal individual thing. I am not going to tell you that you can go 12 hours without extracting milk in any way and feel fine and still produce enough and whatever. That's between you and your lactation consultant and your body. I think that adult nursing parent bodies are very different from baby bodies. Yes, every baby is different, but by and large, you show me a 15-pound, 5-month-old, that's growing and developing normally. That's a baby that can sleep through the night. I don't know what your boobs are going to be capable of. So some people like to pump before they go to bed. Like you put the baby down early and then you do like a last pumping session before you go to bed. Or you wake up feeling really full at like 4 a.m. So you do a quick pump then just to, take the edge off. Some people like to get up and pump during the night to have extra supply. That's totally fine. Again, that all is very individual. So all I'm going to be talking about when I talk about nursing is your baby. What you do with your body is a totally different issue. And I'd be happy to talk to you about that if you want to like message us on Instagram or send an email. All that info is in the show notes. So I'd be happy to talk to you about that. So how do we get a baby to eat less overnight? Well, first of all, we want them to eat more during the day. But as we've discussed before, you can't just force that on them. You can't suddenly try to get someone to eat a full meal between breakfast and lunch. They're just not hungry for that. They're just not going to want to eat that. But if, you stopped eating breakfast and instead, started eating something at, say you normally eat breakfast at 8 in the morning, and then you start skipping breakfast, you're going to be hungry at 10 and you're going to want to eat at 10. So if you decide that your new schedule is to eat at 10 a.m., you're not just going to be able to force yourself to eat at 10 a.m. after having a full meal at 8 a.m. You're going to have to either reduce or cut back on that breakfast in order to eat your newly scheduled brunch or whatever. And that's the same thing with your baby. So if they're eating overnight, a bunch, they're not going to be as motivated to eat during the day. So we have to pull back on the feeds overnight while increasing the daytime feeds. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. We can do it the fast way. Your baby, if they have met all these milestones and your pediatrician said they're okay to go overnight without a feed, they are not going to starve to death if you just say, you know what, tonight we're not feeding you, that's it. They're going to be upset. They're going to feel hungry. They're probably going to cry a fair amount with or without you soothing them, but they will survive. And then the next day and the next day and the next day, they're going to eat less and less overnight because they're getting used to eating less while filling their tummy more during the day. Now, is this what I recommend? There's a pediatrician here in New York. It's a huge practice. They're all over the city. And when you go for your 8-week appointment with your baby, they say tonight, put him in his room at 7, shut the door, don't go in again until the morning. That's it. He doesn't need to eat, whatever. 8 weeks old. These babies are fine. The parents are not. And it's tough. It's a difficult process. So I don't recommend that. You absolutely can do it. But what I want us to keep in the back of our minds is that that is possible, that we want to think about what is the least that we need to feed just to make the process a little smoother, a little easier, not what is the amount that we need to feed them so that they will, not starve to death, because they will be fine. If your baby is younger than say 3 months or smaller than 12 pounds, can you do anything for night weaning, or do you just have to feed them every time they wake up all night long? No, you can absolutely start night weaning. With our newborn care practice, we start night weaning as soon as we get the thumbs up from the pediatrician that the baby is okay to, not be woken up to feed. In the early days, say the first 2 weeks or so, you bring the baby home. The doctor says, okay, got to wake him every 2 hours during the day, every 3 hours overnight. Sometimes they say every 3 hours around the clock. Sometimes they say every 2 hours around the clock. And you're doing that. Once that baby gets back to birth weight or hits a weight that the pediatrician feels comfortable with, they're going to tell you don't have to wake them up to feed anymore. Great. We're going to keep waking them up to feed during the day, like every 3 hours or so, because what we don't want is for the weaning to start happening in the middle of the afternoon. We don't want a 5-hour stretch of sleep from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. We want that 5-hour stretch of sleep to be when you, the grown-ups, are sleeping too. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't it be amazing if you fed your baby at 10 p.m., you went to bed and you didn't see them again until 3 or 4 in the morning? Like, that's incredible when your baby is 3-4 weeks old, and it's very doable. Again, no hard and fast rules. I'm not going to tell you, how many hours every baby's capable of, but I do find it somewhat aligns with how many weeks old they are, starting around 3-4 weeks, say 4 weeks, 4 hours, 5 weeks, 5 hours, 6 weeks, 6 hours, so on. Now, of course, that doesn't mean 2 6-hour stretches. It means one long stretch. So the way that the night sleep develops and the night weaning develops is as one longer stretch. So your baby's not going to go from eating every 3 hours, 3-3-3 to eating every 4 hours, 4-4-4, they're going to go from like a 3-hour long stretch, usually in the early part of the night, to a 4-hour. Sometimes it jumps. Sometimes it goes from 4 to 6. You soothe them at that, 4-hour mark and they sleep another 2 hours. Like, who knows? They are full of surprises. That is what we can kind of expect to see. And then beyond that, after that first feed, after the long stretch, you're going to see probably the same about every 3 hours or so, maybe 4, but they're not going to do 2 super long stretches. They're not going to split the night down the middle with one feed. That stretch is going to get longer and longer and longer. So the way that we do that when we are caring for a young baby is that when we've decided when we want that stretch to be, so say, the first stretch is from 7 p.m. on, when the baby wakes up at the 3-hour mark, the 4-hour mark, whatever, we're going to try to soothe the baby however we can. Sometimes it's super easy. Sometimes a baby starts going, eh. And you go, thinking, oh, let me get the food ready. Let me get mom and get her to nurse. Let me start getting the bottle ready. And then you pick the baby up to go bring them to nurse and they're passed out again in your arms. And you're like, wait a minute, you're clearly not that hungry. So as caregivers who are there to work and not to try and get as much sleep as possible, this is the crucial difference, because as parents, you are trying to get back to sleep. And I do not blame you for that. But what we do is we say, okay, let me see how long I can get you to go. So when the baby starts going, I probably just ignore them. Sometimes I might put a hand on their chest. If we're doing the pacifier, I might give them the pacifier. Once they start getting a little more, a little more intense, fully waking up, then I might pick them up. I might rock them a little bit. Sometimes just holding them still, sit up in bed or in a chair and hold them on your shoulder and they'll fall back asleep. Sometimes you can even put them back down. Sometimes they'll sleep in your arms for another hour, 2 hours, whatever. But what we want to do is we want to wait and see, when is that baby truly hungry? Like, will they accept food when they start going, Of course they will. Of course they will. Who wouldn't? When I wake up and roll over in the middle of the night, if there was a plate of fresh baked cookies on my nightstand, you better believe I'd be eating one. But since it's not there, I don't go upstairs and get a cookie. So a thing you can do when you are the parent and you are trying to get back to sleep as much as possible is pick a night. Pick like a weekend night or something, maybe where you don't have a lot of responsibilities the next day. Switch off with your partner or a family member or a caregiver or somebody like that. Hire a postpartum doula to come just for one night and devote yourself to like reading your baby and saying, okay, how long can I get the baby to go in between feeds? If you are the nursing parent, hand off to someone else who's not nursing, because as we've discussed, smelling that milk is going to make it harder to soothe the baby without feeding. See how long you can get them to go. Sometimes they shock the hell out of us. A lot of the time they do. Even if you can get them to go 30 minutes or an hour past their previous time, that's a huge win. So really wait till there's just no consoling them, no soothing them, and they are just not going back to sleep for anything. They want that food. Then you feed them, because that is a hungry baby. A baby that's going, is a baby who says, yeah, I could eat. Sure, yeah, I'd have a snack. A baby who is like, there's no consoling, no soothing, pacifier's not doing it. Another test that I give for hunger is for a baby at any time of day, if they're fussing and crying, give them the pacifier. If it soothes them, then they just needed to suck and then maybe they're tired and they'll calm right down. If it soothes them for a second and they're like, oh, okay, good, suck, 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 calm. And then they're like, Rah! Or they're sucking on it so ferociously that I say it's like it owes them money. That baby wants milk to come out of that nipple. So that is also a good way to test if they're hungry. So that's how we develop that long stretch and how we work on that over time to get them to a better place. Sometimes we're not working every night with a client. So I'll be there one night and I'll say, wow, you know what? Like, I know she's been waking up at the 3.5-hour mark, but last night I soothed her and she did 5 hours. Like, that's amazing. And I tell the parents in the morning and they're like, oh gosh, yeah, like we're going to try that. And then sure enough, the next night when they're on their own, they get the baby to go 5 hours because they know that she was capable of doing that. So, just have in the back of your mind, I want to see how long you can go. I want to see what you're capable of. Then you just keep doing that, like every week or every few nights or whatever. Say, I'm not going to feed you at the 5-hour mark, the 6-hour mark. I want to see how long you can go. Usually the first stretch of the night is the easiest one to get to be longer. Something you can also do is a dream feed. And I've talked about this before in kind of a different context, but it's actually relevant here in that context as well. But when you have a small baby that still need to eat overnight, sometimes we do a dream feed so that we can align the long stretch of sleep with the adult sleep. So if your baby goes down at 7 and they do a 6-hour stretch, they're going to be up at 1 in the morning. If the parents went to bed at 11, they had a nice quiet 4 hours, but they were awake, they were watching TV, they were doing whatever. Now they want to be sleeping. So if we do a dream feed at 10 or even a response feed, if we feed the baby at 10 when they wake up at that 3-hour mark, then we can try and get that 5-hour stretch to start at 10, which would get them to 3 in the morning. So now you've gone to sleep at 11 and you get 4 hours of sleep before you have to wake up and feed the baby, which is much nicer than getting 1 hour or 2 hours of sleep. So if you can align their feeding with when you go to sleep, that can work really well. Sometimes they're just going to be up at 1 a.m. regardless. So doing the feed at 10 o'clock doesn't really help you. That's really kind of an individual thing based on your baby. You might get that 5-hour stretch in the beginning part of the night. It's nice to have the stretch in the early part of the night. You can go out. If you have somebody else caring for the baby, you can put the baby to bed and then all they have to do is sit there and make sure their house doesn't catch on fire. And then you come home and feed the baby before you go to bed and that's it. So that is how we cultivate that long stretch with a younger baby. Can we do that with an older baby? Absolutely. I would push the envelope a little bit harder with an older baby. And when I say an older baby, we're talking 4 months plus. They may have already self-weaned somewhat, or maybe you were doing this technique and you got them down to 1 feed overnight or 2 small feeds or, something that's the equivalent of 1 feed overnight. Also, if feeding is the only way your baby will fall back asleep, you do want to change that habit. So you can work on putting them down awake. You can work on rocking them to sleep. You can work on, using the pacifier, anything that works for you that is not falling asleep while eating is going to be an improvement. It's going to be a positive change. So if you're nursing and your baby only knows how to fall asleep nursing, of course they're going to want to nurse 10 times a night. But if you can really put some effort into getting your baby to sleep without that, then that's going to go such a long way for you. I'll take a brand new baby that's 1 or 2 weeks old, and if I've fed them, they're fed, they're changed, they're swaddled, they're just wide awake, I'm going to lay them down in the bassinet and see what happens. Not crying, not fussing. I'm not saying we should be letting, 1-week-old babies cry it out, but a lot of the time they don't cry at all. They just kind of lay there with their eyes open. And then their eyes slowly close. And look at that. We're starting to create good habits of falling asleep on their own without any crying or without any stress. So, if that's something that works for you, then that's great. Another option is that you can still feed them at the same time, but just feed them less, give them a smaller feed. So if you're nursing, cut it off a few minutes before you would normally do it. Say, 1 minute less or 2 minutes less, and then progress down that path where each night or every couple of nights you're shaving off a minute. Or if you're feeding in the bottle, you're shaving off an ounce or half an ounce. Or you could, try to shave off more and see what happens. Feed them only to when they start to doze off versus our feeds during the day where we're really trying to push them to take a full feed and take as much as possible because we want them filling up during the day. At night, when they're feeding, just let them drift off and stop feeding and say, okay, that's it. Now, the caveat here is that don't let them wake up in an hour and feed them more because then we're just turning it into all night snacking. When they wake up again an hour later, you want to soothe them back to sleep without feeding them more. Or if you get to the end of the bottle or time's up on the feed at the breast and they're still awake and they're fussy and they're hungry, that's when we're going to start doing our strategies to soothe them. So pacifier, rocking, holding, whatever that takes. Or if you're sleep training, just putting them back down in the crib awake at that point. You can stretch out the time or you can reduce the amount that they're taking. Either one will work. You kind of have to play around with it a little bit. The important thing is that once you get